Hey guys, welcome to this tutorial where we are going to be focusing on ES6 classes in JavaScript. Basically, this tutorial is just going to focus on some examples of ES6 classes, and I'll basically just be walking you through the anatomy so that you can better understand ES6 classes for the purposes of your own projects. So just before we get started, I'm just going to walk you through quickly the setup that I have here. I'm going to be using Atom as my code editor just because I do find that it is a little bit beginner friendly. But of course, if you do want to level up or if you already have, you are more than welcome to use whatever code editor you wish. I typically use VS Code, and I will be using VS Code in some of the other project tutorials that I'll be doing. So the boilerplate that I have set up here is just basically a folder. It's got two files in it. We've got a JavaScript file, and then we've got our HTML boilerplate file. I think I'll just add a title here for the purposes of our browser tab. So we'll just call this ES6 classes, I guess. And what I've done is I've just connected the JavaScript file through the use of script tags so that we have access to it from our HTML. And I've loaded the HTML in my browser, and we'll be using the browser console. Sorry about that. We'll be using the browser console to work with our JavaScript so we can see what's going on. This setup isn't really what you would necessarily use if you're just working with JavaScript. However, I do like to use this in my tutorials just because if you are trying to build JavaScript projects with HTML and CSS, you would typically use a setup such as this, where you have all your files kind of connected to one another and you're viewing your work in your browser. However, you do have the option of using a terminal or working in a console that's separate from your browser. You don't necessarily have to do it this way. So what I'll do is we'll start off with our first example. So let me just go, I'm going to go into my JavaScript file here. And on line 1, I'm going to just declare a comment. I'll call this example 1. This will be a basic car example. You've probably seen this in other scenarios if you have learned about object-oriented programming at some point. And this is basically what we're going to be doing in the context of JavaScript. So our first example is going to be the declaration of our first class. We're going to declare a class called car. The curly braces after we've declared our class represents the body of the class. And basically a class in JavaScript, in terms of object-oriented programming, you can look at it as a sort of blueprint or template for creating an object. The class is basically what holds the data for the object, and we'll understand more about what this means as we continue. So the first thing we need to do inside the body of our class is declare our constructor. And for those of you who are familiar with OOP or object-oriented programming, you would be familiar with constructors and what they do, particularly in JavaScript. When we declare this constructor, we need to pass it parameters or arguments that will represent the information or the data that we feed to the class when we instantiate it. We will get more into that in a second. So in the case of our car example, we are going to have a car that will have a year, a model, and a color. And once we're done with that, we're going to, in the body of our constructor, give it properties that will basically represent the keys of the object once we create an instance of it, or once we instantiate an object based on this class. So what we'll do is we use the this keyword to do this, and basically what this does is it takes the context of our class, and it will, what we can do is when we go, for example, this dot year, we can set it equal to the year that we give to the instance of this car. So let's say we pass in an argument that represents the year. It then gets saved as the value for the year property inside of the car class. And we'll see that in a second. So I'm just going to say this dot year equals year. And for the model, I'll do the same. This dot model equals model. And for the color, I'll do the same. This dot color is equal to color. So what we've done basically is just we bound our parameters to the keys within our class. This is basically going to be the template for setting up every instance of our car class. So this car class itself is not the actual object. It basically just represents the template. So whenever you want to know information about a car instance, you go to its class as a way to see, oh, okay, this car class has a year property, it's got a model property, it's got a color property, and each of those properties will have values that get fed into the class when we create an instance of it. Okay, so let's see that in action. I'm going to go down a couple lines and I'm going to declare an instance. I'm going to instantiate our first car. So this is going to be called my car. And in order to create an instance of this car class, we need to use the new keyword. So this basically, in the case of all object constructors, this is how we would instantiate or create an instance of that object based on its class. So in order to create this instance, we're going to use the new keyword and then just say new car. And because this car has parameters being given to it, we need to add our round brackets and give it arguments that represent these parameters. So the first parameter is the year, so we need to give it a year. And the second parameter is a model, so we can give it a model, and I'll just say Toyota because I drive a Toyota. And the third one is color, so I guess we'll say blue. So now that we've done this, we've instantiated a car object, and the car object now has properties of a year, model, and color, each represented with these values. So the year is 1991, the model is Toyota, and the color is blue. Now, let's print this to our console and see what we get. Just going to copy this my car variable. I'm going to paste it in here, and then we'll refresh. Now notice in our console what appears is car, and it tells us that we've got a color of blue, a model of Toyota, and a year of 1991, exactly as we expected it. So basically this instance of our car class on line 10 is what we're seeing in the console. It is an object that has the following key value pairs as we have created it to be. So one thing I do also want to show you guys is, let's say if we wanted to change the names of these properties. For example, if we wanted our year to be date instead of year. If I change this key, it doesn't impact the parameter values because this this dot whatever represents the property or the key within the object. So let's just see what that looks like. So notice here now where we had year before representing the key for 1991 is now date. The reason why I wanted to show you guys this is because people tend to get confused sometimes when they're first learning about classes in JavaScript. They think, okay, what's the point of doing this dot year equals year, this dot model equals model? Why are we using the same names? I mean, to be honest, I prefer to use the same names because it's easier for me, but if you want to use different names that are more meaningful to you for the purposes of the values that you're representing, you can go on right ahead as long as you know what is pointing to what. So just know that on the left-hand side of the equal sign in our constructor, these are the keys or the properties that we're setting within our object. And on the right-hand side of the equal sign, these are the values being accepted as arguments by our class instance.